questions through the chat feature, and we will also be including a Q&A towards the end of the presentation. Also, please make sure your messages are for everyone and does not disclose any personal information. This presentation is meant to be informational only and does not constitute specific legal advice. The specific process and limitations in an individual case may be different. For case-specific legal advice, please set up an appointment with Lucero or Lorena. The information in this presentation is subject to change. Also, please understand that the content provided is meant to be an overview, and we're just trying to cover everything in this short amount of time. Thank you. For our agenda, we will discuss the basics, the types of cases we handle, and a DACA update, and know your rights, and finally a Q&A.
All right, so I will go ahead and start it off. So who are we? We're the UC Immigrant Legal Services Center. And as a legal services, we are a nonprofit which we primarily serve the current UC students, currently enrolled UC students with any of their immigration related needs. Not only do we serve the UC students themselves, but immediate family members. Our center is based off UC Davis School of Law. And for those that may have already touched base with Lucero and I, you may have noticed that our phone numbers, area code starts with 530, or our emails are at law.ucdavis.edu. And that is primarily because that's where our center comes from. So the way it works is, so our main headquarters is from the UC Davis School of Law, and we serve 9 out of the 10 UC campuses. So there's an attorney assigned to most of each of those campuses listed here on the slide. So for UCI, we have the lovely Lucero Chavez. And then the way it works is we have a NorCal supporting staff and then SoCal supporting staff, me, for the Southern UC campuses. Yeah, that's all for this slide. And so the very basics of who we are and what we do. So again, we do provide free immigration legal services to currently enrolled UC students at any UC campus. Not only the students themselves, but immediate family being the parent, siblings, spouse, and children. Unfortunately, we do not have capacity to help alumni, staff, and uncles, aunts, cousins. Right now, that's what our capacity is limited to. And the services are completely free of cost. Free of cost meaning we don't charge for the legal representation, any printing that we do, copying or mailing for the applications. The only thing that may come out of pocket will be the filing fees. So whatever goes out to the government. Some campuses like UCI has funding available to cover some of the costs. Some meaning only for, so while our center is able to expand to immediate family members, since the campus themselves, it's money that's mainly for the UC students, they're only able to cover the cost for the UC students and not their immediate family members. So currently right now, there is funding available to cover the cost of, like, for example, DACA, the 495. So students don't have to worry about that filing fee. I believe for advanced pro as well, and potentially other forms of relief, which we can run by the Dream Center to make sure that there's enough funding to cover those. But for the most part, it's free. Just whatever goes out to the government may come out of pocket for family members. So the services that we provide, it ranges from legal advice that can be done in an immigration consultation to the full-on representation of a case. And that goes on like, so some immigration cases take longer than what you're here for as a student. That doesn't matter. As long as you sign a representation agreement with our center and you've already graduated, we still continue the process with you. What matters is touching base before you graduate, being able to sign a legal representation that we will be assisting you with the case, and you're set. So next slide, please. And of course, everything is confidential. As I mentioned before, since our legal services are the headquarters is from UC Davis School of Law, our center staff and volunteers, as you see there, volunteers being interns, the interns even sign a confidential agreement that there's nothing that's shared outside of our offices. The center staff being like, there's UCI staff and faculty do not get to see this immigration paperwork that goes on with our center. If there's anyone that may be involved, will be the Dream Center, but you would be notified and you would be signing an authorization of release for the information or waiver confidentiality, allowing us to share this information. And that even includes for the filing fees. So when we allow UCI to cover the filing fees for you, there is a waiver that is signed that you're allowing, basically letting the Dream Center know that they will be covering your cost for example, for like DACA. And that's because we're releasing some sort of information that is applying to you to be able to receive that funding. That is all on this slide for me. Now, what type of cases do we handle? I know I've mentioned DACA, but we actually help with more than DACAs. As you can see here, it helps illustrate as far as like all other immigration reliefs that are available. DACA renewals are very much a heavy caseload that we do receive, but we do also help with family-based petitions, adjustment of status, citizenship. And I know some of this stuff will be like, well, what does that mean? We're gonna go a little bit more in depth and break it down as far as like what each of these boxes, what is it that the immigration benefits are for those. But this is just more of an illustration, so you can see that there is more than DACA. There is many immigration reliefs that we may be able to assist with. And again, not only the student, but also their immediate family members. And where do we start off? Well, we start off with the consultations. A consultation is very important. Many students may already have DACA and they know, boy, I'm eligible for DACA, so I'm good to go, right? Well, it's always good to check in with the legal attorney, like a licensed attorney, just so, mainly because immigration policies are always changing, and we saw that a lot under the Trump administration. So there may have been changes that were affected or may benefit that were not available either when you apply for DACA, or maybe you weren't properly screened, or maybe you don't have DACA and you're not eligible for DACA. Well, what else can I apply for, right? And if there's anything else that you may qualify for, or maybe you are not eligible at the moment for anything, well, how can I prepare? How can I better prepare if there's a policy change, especially under this new administration that we're very hopeful that something will come through that will help many of us and our family members. So it's always good to book an appointment with a licensed attorney, and you can always look up their state bar license number to make sure they are licensed to be able to provide you with the legal consultation and legal advice. And I say that because there's a lot of notario fraud, a lot of immigration consultants that say that they can provide legal advice, or they can, it's an easy assessment, or there's Facebook groups, you know, where we're like, oh yeah, like so-and-so had it this way, it applies to me. No, we're trying to break those barriers. And it's also something as far as like, I know in many families or communities, like our parents be like, oh, well, so-and-so got it this way, it should, you know, it should work for you too. No, every case is very different. When it comes to criminal convictions, any criminal related items, very important, again, please seek legal advice. If you're in any criminal proceedings or family members in criminal proceedings, please let your public defender know about your immigration status. It makes a big difference. One very quick, simple example I can give is like, if there's a potential conviction for a DUI, and they can bring it down to a wet and reckless, that makes a big difference, especially, for example, with DACA. And again, it goes beyond DACA. I mentioned DACA because that's my main area of expertise, but simple things like that matter a lot. So it's always important to please make sure that you are seeking a consultation, especially when these resources are available for free. And again, not only to you, but to your family members. If it's at no cost, it doesn't hurt to receive legal advice. Especially when we have a Lucero available here.
Thank you, Lorena. And I do want to emphasize this idea of a consultation. So setting up an appointment where we go over any potential eligibility for relief, that's something that is really important. We obviously do a lot of affirmative cases where we file things with immigration, try to get petitions, work permits, visas, etc. But we also can sometimes do, or always start with case investigations. And that means that other than asking you questions or your immediate family member questions about how they entered the United States, any contact with law enforcement that they may have, we also do a lot of Freedom of Information Act requests. And that means we ask various branches of the government to give us copies of anything that they may have on a particular individual, right? So if someone entered on a tourist visa multiple times through JFK, but they don't have those records or don't remember, that information may be relevant for a case. And so we can request those records, entry records from Customs and Border Protection or the Department of Homeland Security to get those records to start to investigate if there's anything that that person can do. So just as a general plug for consultations. So we do a lot of different types of case. The majority of our cases are family-based. So what that means is you have an immediate relative who is a US citizen. And again, immediate relative is a parent, a child, or a sibling or a spouse. And so if you have an immediate relative who's in the United States, who is a US citizen or a lawful permanent resident, or you are that person to someone in your immediate family that is undocumented, they may be able to petition for you, or you may be able to petition to them. Family-based petitions can take anywhere from as quickly pre-COVID to as quickly as a year, depending on the family relationship and your country of origin, to 20 years. So there's no necessarily rhyme or reason to why immigration puts strange quotas or illogical quotas on different countries or caps. That just means, again, going to Lorena's point, if someone says, well, my neighbor's cousin's, nanny was able to fix her status in 8 months, like, why is it going to take 15 years for me? Well, it matters. A lot of different parts of that situation may matter. So even if you have an immediate relative, for example, that's a US citizen, or you are that US citizen for a parent, it also matters how that person or how you entered the country. So a case, again, that could take 2 years, depending on the manner of entry, could also take a lot longer than that. So just things to be aware of as the more we hear about immigration in multiple contexts. U visas are for folks who have been victims of qualifying crimes. So that list is about 14 specific crimes that immigration has identified as fairly significant. They're usually things like felonious assault, so like severe assault, sexual assault, different types of domestic abuse. The crime had to have happened in the United States. The individual, the person who perpetrated the crime, it doesn't matter their legal status or whether ultimately, even if they are convicted, what matters is that the person who was the victim of the crime reported the crime and cooperated with the investigation to the extent that there was an investigation. So many people have been the victims of crimes, 15 years ago or 10 years ago, a long time ago. And they think, well, I never reported it, or I reported it, but I don't know what happened. So that doesn't mean that there's no chance or no hope there. The idea is you can still make a police report. You can make a police report at any point in time. You just have to go to the relevant agency and say, I want to report this crime. You report the crime. And then we follow up after that to try to get a copy of the police report and follow the process. So U visa petitions take a long time. This is one of the forms of relief with immigration that can take up to 8 years, even if we may have heard recently that things are meant to start to speed up. We haven't seen that in practice necessarily, but the U visa is a form of relief that is very forgiving, meaning if someone has a criminal history, if someone has prior deportations or removals, the U visa can forgive a lot of that, which some other types of petitions, the majority of other petitions do not. So that's just something to keep in mind. Also, if you are the spouse or the child of someone who's been a victim of a crime, you may also be able to benefit from the U visa as a derivative applicant. There are different restrictions there depending on age, but that's also something to keep in mind. So VAWA is the Violence Against Women Act. So this deals specifically with relationships to US citizens who have perpetuated violence against a partner or the partner's children or parent. So that type of relief doesn't take as long as a U visa. It can take less than 2 years, but it does require some evidence of that violence and other sort of supporting evidence and documentation about the harm. So it is, the VAWA, like the U visa, is a type of relief that does take a little bit more from the individual who has experienced that process in terms of having to discuss what happened, potentially going to a licensed therapist to get a report about what happened. So there's a lot that can go into that. But again, the idea is at the end of that road, there is a legal permanent residence, a minimum level work permit, and potentially a road to citizenship. The T visa is another visa similar to the U in terms of it's for a specific type of individual. In this case, T stands for trafficking. So forced migration into the US for types of labor, different types of labor. The T visa is actually one of the few types of visas that does not take very long, but obviously does require a lot of documentation, likely, police information and other things. Asylum is not something that we do too much of, but something that I've done a lot in my practice. For folks that have a fear of returning to their home country for a particular reason, so not necessarily just general violence or economic conditions, but an individual is afraid for some reason in particular related to a part of them that they cannot change, right? So whether it's a political opinion, their race, their religion, or membership in a particular social group that's also visible within the community. So pretty technical, but the basis is you're afraid to return to your country because you think you specifically would be harmed if you return there. Special immigrant juvenile status is another type of case that we do a lot of, especially with the age range of the population that we serve here at UC Irvine and the UC system. This form of relief is available to folks who are under 21 and who have been abused, abandoned, or neglected by one or both parents. So we know there are folks who are in single parent households, folks who have never met their other biological parent. We have folks who have had parents who have passed away. And so there are different situations where an individual may qualify for special immigrant juvenile status, but that under 21 deadline is a really hard deadline. So if you or anyone you know is under 21 and may potentially qualify for special immigrant juvenile status, this is another road that can lead eventually to citizenship. So something to keep in mind. And then there are employment-based visas. We don't have any expertise in those, typically because they're very specific to a given field or employer. But we can try to refer out if that becomes an issue. Otherwise, typically those types of visas are done directly through an employer. So just to talk a little bit about more about family petitions, there's a misconception about family petitions. Many people think, okay, my child just turned 21. I am undocumented. They were born here. They can petition for me. Let's move the process forward. Or I have a child with disabilities. That means that I can get some sort of humanitarian aid or assistance from the United States. Unfortunately, neither of those things are true. Very specific things have to happen, have to be the reality of those individuals in order for family-based petitions to even be filed. So when it comes to children petitioning for their parents, if you have a parent that's undocumented and you yourself are a US citizen, or you have a sibling that's a US citizen and wants to petition for them, one of the things that's most important in that situation is how the parent entered the United States. So did they come with a tourist visa, through an airport or through a land border? Did they come uninspected? Did they cross through the border, through a desert? Did they present false papers at the border, pretending to be somebody else? So there are a lot of different ways, obviously, that folks can enter the United States. But in order for a family petition to be the easiest path will be if that person entered legally. So even if they entered on a tourist visa that was valid for 2 weeks and they never left, right? That's okay for purposes of a family petition. It's more okay than someone who entered the United States without inspection. If someone entered the United States without inspection, then they have to go through a process called consular processing, and things can get really sticky, really messy, and they may not even qualify for that process depending on other factors. So it's not simple. Really, it's only simple if that person entered with inspection and hasn't had any other issues with law enforcement or immigration. So that's one misconception. The other is having or dealing with a family situation where you have someone with special needs or a child with disabilities. Those types of considerations and factors only become relevant really in immigration court. And we don't want to get anybody into immigration court. That's not going to help somebody's case, because ultimately that can lead to deportation from the country. And that's not something that we would encourage. It is something that we have seen and heard a lot, especially in the 90s, where notarios or immigration consultants would file frivolous petitions with immigration that would ultimately get denied and referred to immigration court. The idea being, while that case is pending, the person can get a work permit and then present evidence in court about why they need to remain in the country. But that risk does not pay off in terms of the ultimate reward of being able to remain in the United States. So just a few things to think about. So we talked about consular processing and as it relates to, whether a case can be easy if you want to adjust your status. Well, one of the things that can help with that is advance parole. So advance parole, you are asking the government for advance permission to leave and then re-enter the United States. So typically advance parole is only available to individuals who already have some sort of temporary status. So whether that's things like temporary protected status or DACA, for example, those folks have already been vetted by the government. They have some formal government identification issued by the government, and they would provide details about why they would want to travel. So there are three reasons or three categories of visits that you can request through advance parole. There's humanitarian, educational, and employment-based advance parole. We do have a webinar specifically on advance parole on our website. The website's linked on the last page. I would definitely encourage folks to check that out if they are interested. But what happens with advance parole is that if you re-enter the country with advance parole, then you're entering the country with permission. So even if you previously entered without inspection or in some other way, entering with advance parole is a way to sort of erase those prior entries. And this is that entry with advance parole is the one that matters for purposes of any future petitions. So like with any immigration form, there's a fee. If your advance parole application is denied, that fee is not going to get returned, right? So if you don't submit enough evidence, if you do study abroad and you decide not to travel and study abroad, you can't take your application back. They typically, if you submit a credit card authorization form or a check, they'll usually deposit those pretty quickly, even if they're going to deny the application, i.e. they're going to take your money. So just to be careful with those types of things. But a lot of students in the university apply for advanced parole for educational purposes. So to do study abroad programs, we have a partnership with the study abroad office here at UCI. So if you go to them, they'll probably refer you to us. And then once we talk, then I'll refer you back to them to continue the process. But it is something that students with DACA at least can and are able to do. In terms of the employment-based advanced parole, that's also not something that we typically do. That process should usually be done through an employer, since they'll be the ones to sign off and provide those details. And then really, even once folks become legal permanent residents, the best protection that anybody can have in the United States is going to be to become a US citizen, to naturalize and become a US citizen. Obviously, you have the right to vote, you have the right to travel, you can apply to help other immediate family members, you can access public benefits without consequence. And most importantly, you can't be deported once you are a citizen. There are many cases when legal permanent residents fall out of status, maybe they do something and have some run in with the law and they can ultimately be deported. But if they had naturalized or have the ability to naturalize, become US citizens, then that is something that we would definitely encourage. So ultimately, we want to be able to get to a place where we can help as many people as possible, and the best protection and the way to get there is to become US citizens. So that's our hope in trying to get folks there.
And to vote once you're able to become a US citizen. So here comes now with the DACA updates and very long series that some may be familiar with. we have a list here of some of the items that have happened, but there's been a lot more back and forth that has happened. It began in September of 2017 when the Trump administration decided to rescind DACA. I won't go too into detail because it's very draining how much back and forth there has been. And it's still really to be continued. Currently, right now, Texas has won in the sense of there's only DACA renewals that are being accepted or accepted to be processed. So DACA renewals remain the same. DACA initials, which are like first-time individuals or individuals are applying for DACA for the very first time, USCIS will gladly take your money and your packet, but they won't look at it. The reason for that is because of the Texas court decision, they're not allowed to process the DACA first-time application. So a first-time applicant can still apply for DACA, and in the hopes of some policy change, again, we're hoping under this administration, something happens where there is a change, and then again, the fight continues. When it comes to DACA, hopefully there's going to be something better than DACA. And I say better as far as like some sort of a pathway to legal residency and not simply a work permit. But in the meantime, right, DACA renewals are accepted, DACA initials are accepted but not processed. And for those that had DACA and allowed it or let it expire for more than a year, for whatever reason it may be, USCIS now considers those to be a first-time applicant because as far as they know, they have no whereabouts of where you've been for a whole year. So they bump those applicants back to a first-timer, and that falls back into they'll take your money and accept your application, but they're not going to process it. So it is really important for those that have DACA to continue to renew. Don't let it expire. If it expires, we all have different circumstances that, you know, we come across barriers and situations that puts us in a pickle, but please renew. Don't let it have it expire for more than a year, because then you're found in a situation where if we're in the limbo. For those that have applied for DACA initials, when it was open from December 2020 to July 2021, DACA initials were being processed and some were approved. When it comes to renewal time, please renew. And those that applied for DACA initials but did not get theirs approved on time, they are frozen at the moment. Again, hoping for some policy change. That's why it's really important to stay up to date as far as like every now and then check in with your attorney, check in with these legal resources that are available, just to see if there's been any change or update. And of course, we'll make sure to have webinars available if there is any update with this new administration. I know I mentioned please renew on time. So for now, for those that have DACA, please, please, please renew on time. On time, according to USCIS guidelines, means 150 days to 120 days before your current DACA expires. That's 4 to 5 months before it expires. That doesn't mean like if your DACA expires next month by accident, you forgot, or doesn't mean you can't, renew. No, we didn't submit it like yesterday. So please email us and we'll gladly help you. If there's no spot available, like if you try to book an appointment and I'm completely booked, please feel free to email me and we'll get it out as soon as we can, of course. It's always good to know about any legal options that you may have. I know we talk about DACA, but I do want to remind that not everyone's eligible for DACA. Aside from what's going on with the courts and, regardless if you're able to apply or not, some that are not eligible for DACA, it's important to learn about immigration options. And that goes back to, booking in a consultation with an attorney. In this case for UCI, Lucero. Please, legal resources are available for free, not only at UC, but CSUs and community colleges now. So it is great, that this has been expanding and its resources are a need and are being useful. I also had mentioned how, sorry, not yet. I had also mentioned how it's very draining, all these courts decisions of, going back and forth. It's been a long process with DACA. Please seek mental health support, to deal with all of these changes, that how frustrating they may be, not only to yourself. And again, for those that may not be eligible for DACA, it must be very frustrating. There are opportunities available. Immigrants Rising is a great resource. They have a list of internships available, also fellowships and even stipends that are available for those that do not have a work permit to be able to receive some sort of financial, I don't want to say income, but it's almost like a scholarship. That's the best way that I can explain in a short time. But yes, please renew on time. Don't wait for USCIS to remind you, because they're not going to remind you it's time to renew. Now I'm ready for the next slide. Now, it's really important to know your rights. So one of the things to remember is, regardless of your immigration status, regardless if you were born here or anywhere else, you're a legal resident, you're a citizen, you're undocumented, DACA, it doesn't matter, you have rights. And one of the things that I always share, and I will always remember from my American government high school teacher back in my senior year, which I'm not going to date myself, when was that? But I always remember she mentioned, you have no rights if you don't know your rights. So you might as well, like, it doesn't matter, you could be a citizen. If you don't know your rights, you have no rights, right? Because, you know, the officer or whoever it is that, you know, is violating your rights and you don't know it. So again, status doesn't even matter. You should know your rights. Rights such as even like right to remain silent, you know, right to refuse to consent of search. There is a link that I should have included. ACLU is also a great resource, and they have videos of what to do and kind of like scenarios that are great, both in different languages, that you can also see for not only for yourself, but even for your parents. I know I've done it with my parents, or just to give them a visualize of what to do in a case like if an ICE agent shows up to your door, or encountering with police enforcement. We should have red cards, I believe, at Lucido might have red cards as well. If not, I can drop them off next time I visit her, that are just quick reminders of that have listed of like your rights that you have, especially, again, just a quick reminder, where if you don't know your rights, you have no rights. So regardless of your status.
And I know that we live in California, but that makes it even that much more important to mention this particular information, especially. We know that medical marijuana in California has been legal for some time, and now recreational use of marijuana is also legal in California for folks that are over 21. That is not the case for folks that are immigrants who are undocumented living in California, because the immigration is governed by federal law. So if anybody tells you that it's harmless, that it won't matter, there are questions eventually as part of petitions to become legal permanent residents and eventually to naturalize that talk about the use, and not just the abuse of, but the use of controlled substances, and marijuana is a controlled substance. So we just, as a reminder, because we're in California, it makes it that much more important for you to know, and for you to help spread the word as well. So just to recap a lot of some of what Lorena was saying in terms of the importance of knowing your rights, because if you don't know them, that's great. If you don't know them, you don't have them. You know, all of this is to say knowing your rights is the first part of the battle, but we also know that rights are violated all the time, which is half the reason that attorneys exist. But again, if you don't know that your rights are being violated, you can't report that, you can't seek or file grievances again that in that encounter or after that encounter. So super general do's and don'ts when encountering law enforcement. There are laws, state laws in California that require you to identify yourself when asked by law enforcement. That's all you have to do. You don't have to provide anything else. You don't have to consent to searches of any kind. Especially as an undocumented individual, you never want to assert that you're a U.S. citizen when you're not, or claim that you're a U.S. citizen in any context, because that can have significant consequences to any future petition. You want to make sure that you have passcodes on your phone, right? Now, the passcode isn't 1111, because again, even though you have the right to deny consent to the search of your belongings of your phone, that doesn't mean they're not going to take it from you and try to find something, especially if they're trying to investigate a crime. So you don't want to make things easier for them that you don't have to. Obviously, saying that folks should stay calm during an encounter is easier to say. We talk about all the time how, regardless of your status, if you see a police officer car behind you, you're going to get nervous. It's just the nature of our interactions with law enforcement as communities. But to the extent that you can, it's important to remain calm and not get physical, right? Not give them any excuse to harm you any more than they may already be doing. So do what you can to keep yourself safe. So I don't think any questions came up in the chat. Maybe Lorena can find the link to the ACLU Know Your Rights materials to share. But we did want to leave some time for any questions that folks may have. And we can definitely stop recording at this point if folks have any sensitive questions. You do have my appointment link there, which you probably can't click on. So we'll drop in the chat as well. You have our emails there, which you can always use to reach out. My phone number, that is my cell phone that I have with me at all times. Our office is located in the Rice Week, right next to the Latinx Resource Center and the Dream Center and a few others. You have the websites and our social media accounts, at least Instagram, where we have, at least for us, UC Immigrant Legal Services. If we have a webinar, if there's a legal development, if we have a new FAQ, we will post that on our website and our social media. So definitely feel free to give us a follow. But we want to open it at this point for questions.